The Daniel Martell, the stepfather.
He's on meth.
He's on meth.
He sells meth.
Daniel Martell was accused of struggling with hidden habits. Child Protection Services stepped inside his home, but left in silence. And Jack, just 4 years old, showed up to school with black eyes more than once. His bruises explained away as accidents. Teachers noticed both children arriving dirty, sometimes without proper clothes for the freezing Nova Scotia winters. These were not small details. They were red flags, flashing over and over again. Yet no one stopped it. And just weeks later, Lilly and Jack disappeared. In this video, we're asking the question that no one in authority seems willing to answer. Why were these warnings ignored? Part 1. The hidden struggles of Daniel Martell. Daniel Martell's name has been repeated countless times since the disappearance of Lilly and Jack Sullivan. To some, he is simply the stepfather caught in the storm. To others, he is the man at the center of a web of unanswered questions. And at the heart of those questions are the whispers, accusations that Daniel struggled with hidden habits he could not control. Family members have said Daniel concealed these struggles during the early years of his relationship with Malahia Brooks Murray, the children's mother. They claim he presented himself as stable, hardworking, someone turning his life around. But behind closed doors, a different picture was painted. Relatives later told investigators that Malahia confided in them, saying Daniel would take her phone, isolate her, and hold her down when arguments escalated. She described him as controlling, someone who had to be in charge of every detail in their small, chaotic household. Then came the talk of substances. Malahia's grandmother told police that her granddaughter admitted Daniel had hidden a dependency for nearly a year before she discovered it. Daniel himself has publicly denied having a problem. Yet in the same breath, he has admitted to experimenting with pretty much everything, later telling reporters that he now attends support meetings 3 times a week. He has signed up for online courses in parenting, anger management, and substance recovery, programs recognized by child protection authorities. Why does that matter? Because if Daniel's struggles were known to those responsible for protecting children, then the silence that followed is deafening. Child Protection Services had already visited the trailer in Lansdowne. Teachers at Salt Springs Elementary had raised concerns, yet no one intervened. No one removed the children from what appears, in hindsight, to have been a dangerous environment. And while Daniel speaks publicly about clearing his name, those closest to the case remain deeply uneasy. In interviews, he often shifts his story. About the pink blanket found in the woods, Daniel first told police it wasn't Lilly's. Days later, he changed his story, suggesting it had been planted, possibly taken from his garbage. About the bruises on Jack's face, Daniel blamed Lilly, saying siblings fight, accidents happen. But the repetition of these injuries has left many unconvinced. Relatives say Daniel's temper was unpredictable. They say he could be charming in public, then cold and intimidating at home. Malahia herself eventually admitted she never wanted to stay there, a line she sent in a private message weeks after the children disappeared. Her words suggest a woman who felt trapped, fearful, unable to break away from Daniel's grip until tragedy forced her to. The broader community has taken note. In the months since the children vanished, Daniel has become a target of suspicion online. His name fills true crime chat groups and YouTube live streams with strangers demanding answers. He insists he is innocent, saying he even passed a police polygraph. But in the court of public opinion, his admissions about past struggles only deepen the mistrust. Consider the timing. Just before the children vanished, Daniel's hours at the mill had been cut back. He was relying on relatives for groceries and gas. The family's government benefits had been halted because he failed to file his taxes. His car wasn't working. Financial stress, personal struggles, and tension at home created a pressure cooker environment. To investigators and the public alike, that raises a haunting question. Was this the breaking point? Daniel now says he is focused on self-improvement. He attends meetings, he takes courses, He speaks to journalists about stigma and judgment. He claims he is being unfairly painted as a villain, a man blamed simply because he was the one left behind when Malehia packed up and left with her baby daughter. "I have to clear my name," he told the Globe, his voice cracking. But the truth is harder to shake. 2 children are gone, and every detail of Daniel's hidden struggles matters. If the stepfather was dealing with serious issues that put the children at risk, then why did the system fail to act? Why did CPS visit the home and then fall silent? Why were warnings brushed aside until it was too late? These are not idle questions. They cut to the core of accountability. If Daniel's struggles were known, then authorities had an obligation to step in. If they weren't, then someone failed to see what was right in front of them. Either way, Lilly and Jack were left in a home where chaos outweighed stability and where the adults were far too consumed by their own battles to shield 2 young children. And now, those children are missing, their voices silenced. The adults, left to argue, to accuse, to defend themselves. Meanwhile, the public is left to wonder, did the system ignore the warning signs, or did it choose not to act because the truth was too uncomfortable to confront? As we peel back the layers of this case, one fact stands out. The red flags surrounding Daniel Martell were not subtle. They were visible. They were reported. And yet, just like the children's laughter that once filled the yard, they vanished into silence. Part 2, CPS visits but no action. Child Protection Services. 3 words that should mean safety, intervention, and accountability. Yet, in the case of Lilly and Jack Sullivan, those words instead echo with silence. Because months before the children disappeared, CPS had already stepped through the door of the trailer in Lansdowne. They had seen the environment for themselves. They had heard the concerns raised by teachers at Salt Springs Elementary. And then, they walked away. The visit was triggered when school staff noticed troubling signs. The children were often behind developmentally compared to their peers. They arrived at school without proper clothing for winter. Their hands and faces were grubby, their lips cracked and dry. Jack, just 4 years old, showed up more than once with visible bruises. Teachers knew they had a duty to report. Under Canadian law, educators are legally bound to raise alarms if they suspect a child is suffering neglect or abuse. They did what they were required to do, but what happened next is what baffles so many people. Nothing. According to briefing notes later obtained through Freedom of Information requests, a child protection worker did, in fact, visit the trailer months before May 2nd. What they saw inside has not been made public. Privacy laws shield the details, leaving families and the public in the dark. But if that visit was meant to ensure the children's safety, the silence that followed speaks volumes. No follow-up, no removal, no public accountability. And then, weeks later, Lilly and Jack were gone. To those who have followed this case closely, it feels like déjà vu. Time and again, stories emerge across Canada of children flagged by schools, reported to child protection agencies, and yet left in the same environments that put them at risk. Too often, those children later become statistics in tragedies that could have been prevented. Was this one of those cases? Daniel Martell, the children's stepfather, has his own explanation. He told reporters that the visit was not about neglect, but about learning difficulties. He claimed the children were suspected of having autism, and the caseworker was there simply to assess developmental issues. If that is true, why were teachers reporting concerns about hygiene, bruises, and home life? Why were winter clothes provided by the school board, not the parents? The contradictions are glaring. The problem is compounded by secrecy. CPS, bound by confidentiality, cannot confirm or deny what they saw. Their reports are locked away, shielded from public view. Even extended family members like Belinda Gray, the children's paternal grandmother, remain shut out. "I think the public has a right to know," she told the Globe. "What did they see? What did they do?" Her voice carries the anger of someone who raised red flags herself, only to watch them ignored. The silence from CPS has created a vacuum, one filled with suspicion, frustration, and outrage. People are left to speculate. Did the social worker miss the signs? Did they underestimate the risk? Or did they decide the environment was good enough, despite all evidence to the contrary? Each possibility is disturbing in its own way. What makes this even more painful is that warning signs were not hidden. Teachers saw them, family members noticed them. Even casual observers could see that the trailer, with its clutter and chaos, was not a safe haven for two young children. If CPS had acted, if they had intervened decisively, Jack and Lilly might never have vanished. Instead, the visit became just another box ticked, another report filed, another opportunity lost. For the families left behind, this silence is unbearable. Belinda Gray says she wishes she had pushed harder, demanded answers when she was shut out of her grandchildren's lives. Others in the community question how a government agency with the power to remove children could look at that household and walk away. The anger is not just directed at Daniel or Malahia. It is directed at a system that claims to protect children, but too often protects its own reputation instead. The tragedy of Jack and Lilly is not just about two children who disappeared on a spring morning. It is also about a system that had a chance to intervene and failed. Each unanswered question about CPS's role deepens the sense that this was preventable, that lives could have been saved if someone had acted with urgency, instead of hiding behind paperwork and policies. And that is the heart of the outrage. Because while the RCMP investigation may eventually uncover what happened on May 2nd, the role of CPS remains cloaked in secrecy. Their silence has become another mystery in a case already defined by unanswered questions. When you piece the puzzle together, the accusations against Daniel, the bruises on Jack, the children arriving at school dirty and underdressed, CPS's inaction is impossible to ignore. It is the gap in the timeline that haunts every conversation about this case. A knock at the trailer door that should have changed everything, but didn't. For many, the conclusion is unavoidable. The system failed Jack and Lilly, and until that failure is acknowledged, the questions will only grow louder. Part 3. The bruises on Jack. When people speak about red flags, they often point to one detail that refuses to fade. In the case of 4-year-old Jack Sullivan, that detail was the bruises. His small face told a story long before anyone else did. Photographs from his elementary school field trip in December 2024 captured it clearly. Jack, seated among his classmates, with a green and purple mark swelling beneath his left eye. A bruise that seemed far too large for a boy so small. Teachers noticed. Parents who later saw the images noticed. And yet, nothing was done. It wasn't the first time. Earlier that fall, Jack had appeared with what looked like another black eye. The pattern raised eyebrows. How many times could a child show up with injuries before someone asked the right questions? Daniel Martell, his stepfather, was quick with an explanation. He claimed Lilly, the older sister, had caused it during play. Siblings fight, he said online. Accidents happen. In private messages, he went further, admitting that Jack had many black eyes, but always insisting they came from childish mishaps. A toy truck, a punch, a fall. But anyone who works with children knows the difference between a rough and tumble bruise on a knee and repeated marks on the face. Teachers are legally obligated to report suspicions, and in this case, they did. Yet when CPS visited, those injuries were not enough to trigger decisive action. Daniel's words, it seems, carried more weight than the photos in front of them. The troubling part is not just the bruises themselves, but the normalization of them. Daniel appeared to treat the injuries as routine, something to be shrugged off. Relatives have since revealed that Jack's injuries were defended in casual social media posts, as though they were nothing unusual. The more often bruises appeared, the more they seemed to be explained away. But to outsiders, the explanations ring hollow. How many times can a 4-year-old suffer facial injuries without intervention? Jack's bruises became more than just physical marks. They were symbols of neglect, visible warnings that should have demanded answers. His teachers reportedly provided clothing when he came to school unprepared for the cold. They helped cover gaps that his caregivers should have filled. Yet even as staff stepped in to provide support, the signs of possible harm were brushed aside. For his grandmother, Belinda Gray, the photographs are haunting. She has spoken publicly about the shock of seeing Jack's injuries, about the ache of knowing she had been cut out of his daily life. "We all failed these kids," she later said, her voice breaking. To her, the bruises were proof that the children were not safe where they were living, and yet, nothing changed. What makes this more disturbing is the timing. Just one day before the children disappeared, Daniel admitted Lilly herself had a black eye, caused, he claimed, by an accident with a toy truck. In his words, she pressed down on the toy, and it struck her face. Another coincidence? Another accident? Or another ignored warning? When viewed individually, each bruise could perhaps be explained away, but when viewed together as a pattern, they tell a different story. A pattern of injuries, a pattern of excuses, a pattern of authorities choosing not to intervene. These were not isolated events. They were signals stacking up in plain sight. The public has not missed this point. In online discussions, photographs of Jack's bruises are shared again and again, always accompanied by the same haunting question. Why wasn't this enough? Why did no one step in when the marks were so clearly visible? For many, this single detail is what convinces them the system failed the children long before May 2nd. Daniel, of course, continues to defend himself. He says siblings fight. He says children play rough. He says he never harmed them. But the bruises remain, frozen in photographs, undeniable evidence of a childhood lived under circumstances that were far from normal. And that is the tragedy of Jack's injuries. They were not just bruises. They were cries for help, silent but visible, etched on the face of a child who could not protect himself. Each time Jack appeared with another mark, the adults around him had a chance to act. Each time, they failed. And when the children vanished, those missed opportunities became unbearable to confront. Because when you look back at the case of Lilly and Jack Sullivan, you can draw a line straight from those bruises to the unanswered questions that remain today. A line that says, this didn't come out of nowhere. There were warnings, there were signs. And in the end, the smallest child carried them all on his face, right in front of us. Part 4. The children at school. If you want to know the truth about a child's life at home, ask the school. Teachers see what parents often try to hide. And in the case of Lilly and Jack Sullivan, their school painted a troubling picture. At Salt Springs Elementary, staff noticed the little things first. Jack and Lilly often arrived looking unkempt, their clothes rumpled, their faces dirty. On cold mornings, when snow blanketed the fields and the icy wind swept across Pictou County, the children came without proper winter gear. Teachers quietly scrambled to provide them with coats, boots, and mittens, essentials no child in Nova Scotia should be without. These weren't occasional lapses. They were repeated patterns that raised concern. Developmentally, both children also lagged behind their peers. Jack, especially, was smaller than other boys his age and strapped into the front of the bus for safety. His teachers noted learning difficulties, delays that seemed more than just childhood quirks. Lilly, the older sister, was bright and talkative, but struggled with focus, her energy often masking deeper issues. These struggles became part of the reports that eventually reached Child Protection Services. For educators, the red flags were obvious. Children don't choose to come to school hungry, dirty, or poorly dressed for the season. Those are choices made by the adults responsible for them. Each time staff stepped in to provide clothing or raise concerns, it was an acknowledgement that Jack and Lilly were not getting what they needed at home. But instead of sparking real intervention, the concerns were absorbed into a system that never acted decisively. The most haunting detail is how visible it all was. Other children on the playground noticed. Parents who volunteered on school trips noticed. The photographs of Jack and Lilly, clothes hanging loose, faces showing the wear of neglect, are painful to revisit now, because they tell a story that was playing out in plain sight and yet ignored. Some will argue that poverty was to blame. After all, Lansdowne is a struggling community where 1 in 5 children live below the poverty line. It is true that financial hardship leaves scars, and many families fight to make ends meet. But neglect cannot always be explained away by poverty. A lack of money doesn't account for unexplained bruises. A lack of money doesn't explain the secrecy, the isolation, the refusal to let grandparents see their grandchildren. And poverty certainly doesn't explain why CPS, after being alerted, failed to remove the children from an environment described as chaotic at best, dangerous at worst. Teachers who spoke anonymously said they felt powerless. They reported what they saw. They fulfilled their legal duty. And still, they watched Jack and Lilly arrive each day in the same state, as though their warnings had disappeared into a void. That sense of helplessness has stayed with them. They were among the last people outside the family to see the children alive, and they knew something was wrong. The larger question, of course, is why these warnings were treated so lightly. Was it because the family lived in a remote hamlet, far from watchful eyes? Was it because Daniel Martell was convincing in his explanations, insisting the issues were simply developmental delays, nothing more? Or was it because CPS, stretched thin and overworked, chose to prioritize other cases? Whatever the reason, the result was the same. 2 children left in harm's way. What makes this detail so gut-wrenching is the hindsight. When news broke that Lilly and Jack were missing, teachers and staff looked back at those days when they scrambled to provide coats and boots. They looked at the bruises they reported, the notes they filed, and they asked themselves the question that still lingers today. Could this have been prevented? Because in many ways, the school was the first safety net. It was the place where the truth about Jack and Lily's home life surfaced, however subtly. And if that net had held, if CPS had acted on the reports instead of leaving the children in the trailer, perhaps the story would be different. Perhaps Lilly would still be chattering to her dolls, and Jack would still be lifting rocks to find worms. Instead, the school memories have become evidence. Photographs of field trips are now part of a tragic timeline. Teachers who once taught math and reading now carry the weight of regret, wondering if they could have done more, even though they followed the rules. And the children's classmates, far too young to understand, are left with empty seats in the classroom and questions that have no good answers. In the end, the story of Jack and Lilly at school is not just about education. It is about the visible signs of a crisis that no one stopped. It is about the resilience of teachers trying to protect children, and the failure of the system that should have backed them up. And it is about 2 young lives that slipped through the cracks, even as the warning signs screamed from the classroom door. Part 5. The system that failed them. When 2 children vanish, the instinct is to look for a single moment, a single mistake, a single villain. But in the case of Lilly and Jack Sullivan, the truth is far more complicated. Their disappearance is not only about what happened on the morning of May 2nd, it is also about what happened in the months and years leading up to that morning, about the warnings ignored, the reports buried, and the silence of a system that should have stepped in. We know the pieces. Daniel Martell, the stepfather, faced accusations of hidden struggles. Relatives spoke of controlling behavior, secret habits, and a temper that left Malaya afraid to reach out for help. Daniel denied it all, yet admitted to attending support groups and enrolling in recovery courses. These contradictions alone should have raised red flags. We know Child Protection Services visited the home, tipped off by concerned teachers. They walked into the trailer, saw the living conditions, and then left without taking further action. Bound by privacy laws, they refused to say what they observed. but their silence has become one of the most damning parts of this case. Because whether they underestimated the risk or chose not to intervene, the result was the same. Nothing changed. We know Jack, only 4 years old, showed up to school with repeated bruises. Not once, but multiple times. His stepfather explained them away as accidents, blaming sibling fights or toys gone wrong. But photographs don't lie. They show a child with injuries no one should ignore. They show evidence that was dismissed, minimized, forgotten. And we know the children came to school in conditions that told their own story. Dirty clothes, chapped lips, no winter jackets when snow was falling. Teachers stepped in to fill the gaps, but their duty ended at the classroom door. The children would ride the bus back to Lansdowne, back to a trailer where stability was a myth and chaos was routine. Taken together, these are not isolated incidents. They are a pattern of neglect, a pattern of warning signs, a pattern of failures at every level, from family members who stayed silent to agencies that looked the other way, to a system more concerned with protecting itself than protecting the children. Grandmother Belinda Gray put it bluntly. We all failed these kids. Her words capture what many now believe. The disappearance of Lilly and Jack was not a lightning strike out of nowhere. It was the predictable outcome of a chain of ignored alarms. And that is what makes this case so haunting. Because if every warning sign had been taken seriously, Lilly and Jack might still be here. Instead, the children are gone, and their case remains unsolved. RCMP call it complex, unusual, requiring careful investigation. But the complexity began long before May 2nd. It began when bruises were explained away, when teachers' concerns vanished into a file, when CPS left the trailer in silence, when relatives whispered about Daniel's hidden struggles but did not press harder. The tragedy of Jack and Lilly is not just that they disappeared. It is that the adults around them, family, authorities, professionals, saw the signs and failed to act. Each ignored warning was another thread cut from the safety net meant to catch vulnerable children. By the time May 2nd arrived, that net was gone. Today, their story stands as a chilling reminder. When red flags are ignored, children pay the price. When systems prioritize secrecy over transparency, families are left in the dark. And when accountability is missing, tragedies repeat. So, what happened to Lilly and Jack? That question remains unanswered. But another question is just as urgent. How many more children will suffer before the system learns from its silence? Because in the end, the case of Lilly and Jack Sullivan is not only about a mystery in the woods of Nova Scotia. It is about the failure of an entire system, one that left 2 children invisible until it was too late. 2 children are gone. The questions remain. And the red flags that surrounded Lilly and Jack Sullivan now hang over all of us. How many more warnings must be ignored before change is forced? How many more children must slip through the cracks before someone is held accountable? The bruises, the silence of CPS, the hidden struggles, all of it points to a system that looked away when it mattered most. Lilly and Jack deserved protection. They deserved to be safe. Instead, their voices were silenced, and their story is now a reminder of what happens when warnings go unanswered. If you believe their case deserves answers, if you believe no child should be invisible, then stay with us. Subscribe to True Child Cases, share their story, and add your voice to the call for truth. Because the search for justice doesn't end here, it starts with us.